Hello and welcome to the India Hangout. Militants from the Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant or Syria, as ISIL or ISIS as it's known as, are now controlling large parts of Iraq and Syria. The situation is getting grim. This has impact. I mean, this will have some impact on India for many reasons. One is the presence of Indians on ground in Iraq, working across construction sites and including in hospitals. There's also the impact of potential rise in oil prices and what that could do, not just to the to oil, but also to the stock markets and of course the currency. We are here to talk about all of that with our guests. We here with me at Cricketwala Ayaz Memon. Also joining us, Manjit Kripalani, Executive Director at Gateway House, the foreign policy think tank. Dr. G. Balachandran, Fellow at the Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis from New Delhi. And to understand the market's impact, Deven Choksey of KRChoksey and Sharat Kulkarni of Angel Broking. Thank you all very much for joining us. Ayaz, how do we begin?
Well, fundamentally, I think we need to understand from our guests here has there been a colossal failure of the policies and the strategies of the US and the UK where Iraq is concerned, because it seems to have come back with a vengeance redoubled,
right.
Where the global kind of grid is concerned, the power grid,
and it seems to have happened completely out of nowhere.
Suddenly bolt out of the blue.
Bolt out of the blue. So, and there are some very interesting moves that are happening after that. Iran has stepped into the picture. Iran has actually said, the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, has said that he's ready to defend Shiite holy Muslim sites in Iraq against the killers and terrorists. And also the United Kingdom has talked about reopening its embassy in Iran. So let's get a sense of what's happening there and why and how this could play out for India and anyone watching from here. Manjit, do you want to give us a quick sense? I know that you also have to leave early.
Yes. So this is something that our Indian analysts have been predicting for about 2 years. I know Professor Narapat, who writes for Gateway House, has been talking about how the Shia crescent, which starts out in Libya, running down to Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and ending at Pakistan and Central Asia, that Shia crescent has now become the Wahhabi crescent. There has been, instead of the rise of the Shia, it has become the rise of the Wahhabis. This has all been done with the funding of Saudi Arabia and the United States. We are now in a mess. The Middle East has already seen a lot of turmoil because of the democratic and the freedom impulses of its own population. This is all starting to become very complex, because instead of there being a real sense of introspection in that region, they are now starting to fight with each other. Maybe this is the beginning of real reform in the region, but at the moment it's really terrifying. This is all going to land at the doorstep of India in no time at all. It's also going to land at the doorstep of Europe. So the regions most affected are going to be India and Europe. And I hope that it certainly seems as if this particular government in Delhi has taken cognizance of it. But we don't know, in Europe, they seem not very cognizant of how close the danger is to them.
Right. Okay. Dr. Balachandran, let me come to you. I know that you've been writing and speaking a lot on Iran, particularly in the context of oil and trade sanctions. How do you see this development of the last few weeks, and what, in a broad sense, does it mean for India?
No, when we talk about India, Iraq is the second largest supplier of oil to India. Okay, it supplies about 14% last year. So obviously any disturbance in Iraq and disruption in oil supplies and the consequent rise in oil price will have an impact on India in economic terms. As far as Indian migrant labor is concerned, there are not that many in Iraq, although there are a lot of them in the rest of the Gulf states. Now, if the conflict does not spread beyond the southern part of Iraq and the rest of Gulf states, we will not have a problem of evacuating Indians like we did in the first Gulf War. Right now, there are not that many Indians working in Gulf. Yes, there are some, but not in thousands or tens of thousands. Now, coming back to the situation, it's really too fluid to call. There are too many actors involved. and none of them have a clear grip on the situation. Okay, although Iraq majority is Shiite and Iran might not like to have major disruption there, nevertheless they cannot wash their hands off what's happening in Iraq and what is the Sunni assault and Shiite state. The Sunnis, on the other hand, as people have been talking about the Shiite crescent and all sort of stuff, they too are worried, especially in the context of whether US and Iran will get together and some of the sanctions against Iran may be lifted, in which case one has to accept that Iran will be a major player in West Asia. Not many people like that. So they might also be involved. So there are too many actors, too many conflicting interests, and the two states which can work together may not work together because some of their interests clash directly. That is especially United States and Iran.
Right. So,
to add to that, you've got a leadership in Iraq which seems to be entirely sectarian in its output. You've got an exploding case.
yeah, and that was my question. I mean, just to give someone who's not a student of let's say the region a sense, what is the ability, as you see, of the current government in Iraq, with or without assistance, additional assistance, to repel this attack on and into attack and obviously occupation now of large parts of Iraq?
No, without assistance, they can certainly check the halt of Sunnis advance. They can do that. That's not a problem. Whether they'll be able to retake all the cities that the Sunnis have taken over, that's very doubtful. But in the process, you might find that the sectarian difficulties within Iraq magnify immensely. There were already reports yesterday that Sunnis are being shot in the rest of the Iraqi state. The Sunni rebels are shooting Shiite. You might find much more. Now the Kurds are entirely out of the picture right now, but they are also one of the major factors. So you may not find Iraq as a united country anymore. That's quite possibility unless outside powers intervene either directly or in a substantial manner in that.
Manjit, how are you looking at it? I mean, as a foreign policy think tank, I'm sure you're looking at it across 3 or 4 different parameters. One is, of course, the economic that we'll come to in a moment, but on the political and our ability to react to this, to the extent that we should react, what's your sense?
What can we react? We can only say the traditional Indian ones, at least don't fight, come to an agreement, or live peacefully. We have no direct impact or possibilities of influencing any of the actors in the region. We can only sit on the sidelines, wring our hands, and say, please don't fight. We are not major aid givers. We are not either arms suppliers. Our options are limited in terms of influencing the course of events in Iraq.
Right.
So, Govind, I would say that India can play a very positive role.
Yeah.
The one thing that has happened through all these new democracies that have emerged is that they have had elections, which they've never had before. This is entirely new experience. And they have had sort of only the US to look at as a model. Now, this is a very advanced country. What India teaches you in terms of democracy is the art of negotiation. The West Asian world has really been steeped in violence for a very long time because they've had dictators. These dictators, people have never learned the art of negotiation, which is what democracy is all about. So India can certainly help and certainly should have been very active in teaching and helping people in these young countries understand how to negotiate through democracy. So the Sunnis, instead of being furious and taking to arms because the Shia regime in Iraq has not included them, should really have be learning to push back through democratic means. Unfortunately, the first response is always violent, and unfortunately, the US and the NATO powers are also, their first response is also violence. It's always to arm people, send them arms. Their first reaction is not diplomacy. And they've sort of left everybody at their own, to their own devices. And from a distance, they say, well, we'll arm you, well, we won't. So India being the kind of country it is, in terms of its development process, it's more in line with the countries in West Asia. We can play a positive role. Our institutions can help play a positive role, and we can start teaching people how to negotiate. The electoral process, our own election commission is much more likely to teach these countries how to run an election than an American election commission. As far as I know, the US really did not allow countries like India to participate in these processes because they regard this region as their region. So perhaps as things settle down and we get a little space, India can start showing them democratic processes and also act as a bridge with the Muslim world, since we have so many of our own and we understand the problems.
So, a quick question, Manjit. You mentioned that there is a threat to India. I mean, it could come knocking on our doors also, this problem which is arising, this turmoil. And also the fact that we've got a new dispensation in place now. It's a new government that has come. Do you expect the line to change somewhat? Look, Iraq and India have had very close relations in the past. Do you see that changing at all, or do you think that India can play a more proactive role?
No, I think India will still have a very good relationship with Iraq. Things haven't changed. The Iraqi people haven't changed. Things haven't changed one government to the other. We had a relationship with Saddam Hussein. We had a relationship with Maliki. That will not change. But what is going to happen is that we, as the professor said, we are dependent on West Asia for our oil. Our immediate need now is to diversify our energy options. So we must start looking closer to home. So developing more of a greater engagement with countries like Bhutan and Nepal, which seems that this is what our new Prime Minister is doing, so that we can get more hydropower. Looking to Central Asia, how can we get direct connectivity and get the oil from Central Asia? And also just looking at our own region, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Latin America to get oil. The US and North America, Mexico is looking to India to buy more of their shale oil. And this will also happen. But
right. I think we've got Surya also joining in. Surya, do you want to give us a quick sense of how you are reading the situation at this point? I mean, considering that you've also been interacting with officials at the MEA? Okay, so we don't have Surya there. Okay, let's get a sense on what this could, or rather how this could play out if things were to get worse. And let me come back to you, Dr. Balachandran. Assuming if this escalates, I mean, Baghdad is overrun, and there is and things really get worse from where they are. What's the worst case situation we're looking at, not necessarily from an Indian point of view, but in terms of what's going to happen in the region?
All of us agree that the Manjit administration has not been entirely following what we may call the reconciliation process for a long time. Now, unless there is some change of heart on his mind or his approach to the sectarian issue, I don't see any major advance being made in getting the peace. Now, as far as India's experience is concerned, we have passed the time when we can go and lecture them on democracy, how to hold elections. Look, when there's a fire going on, you don't say, why don't you have a fire-fighting equipment in your house? First you put out the fire. Then you can see how you can do that. India's experience in holding elections, etc., and all those things are of no immediate relevance to what is happening in the state. If everything settles down, yes, we can help them. Can we help them to settle down? Can we bring some peace in that area? We are not in a position to do any of those things. Okay? How it can develop depends quite a lot on Maliki, how he responds to the situation, whether he tries to be more inclusive or he tries to mobilize the Shiites against the Sunnis, in which case the rest of the Sunni countries tries to mobilize. They also have their own problem. They don't want the radical Sunnis to be taking over, yet on the other hand they cannot afford to have the Shiites taking the lead over the whole of the situation. It's a very complex situation. I suspect, finally, some sort of modus operandi may come between the United States and Iran. The minimum objective will be to bring a certain degree of order in the area. I think they may be able to cooperate on that. As for the long-term solution to the Iraqi problems, sectarian problems, I suspect you might find it divergent. The advantage is Iran at the moment is in the final stages of its negotiations with the United States on the Iran peace negotiations. So to that extent, they would not like to jeopardize their chances of a successful conclusion of that because their economic future, they are depending quite a lot on being able to come to some sort of normalcy in Iran. So there are pluses and minuses in Iran-US cooperation to some extent. To what extent they are able to keep aside their fundamental differences and work in the short term is anybody's guess. Okay, I would not like to take a guess on that at this point.
Right. Manjit, how, this is an interesting time for the markets and the economy as well. I mean, it's obviously there's been a lot of euphoria in the stock markets. That of course doesn't affect oil price, but oil price had sort of, as a factor, had become a little benign. The rupee had been strengthening to some extent. Now all of that is obviously turning. And for reasons that perhaps no one really expected and fathomed. How do you see that impacting things going ahead? I mean, does this change the whole mood, or can it potentially change the mood in the country as we know it now?
Well, I don't think it's going to change the mood in the country as such. It is an externality that we were not expecting, but perhaps this government had anticipated it, given that their intelligence is quite good. What we can do, and I think that some of us have started thinking about, is if you remember when there were sanctions imposed on Iran in 2011 by the US, Bombay itself was very close to lights out. We were 2 days away from lights out because we couldn't import our oil from Iran. And so we had to find all kinds of means to get there. We might be facing a similar situation since we are so dependent on Iraq also for oil and perhaps even on Iran. First, perhaps the US will start lifting sanctions on the countries that we are dependent on, which is Iran and Russia. And secondly, we have to start building an alternate, a non-dollar financial architecture through which we can start paying and working our way through creating a system with developing countries and producing countries that are, oil-consuming countries.
So the rupee meanwhile has now almost hit 63, and just to give you some stock market figures, the Sensex was down 274 points at 25,246. The Nifty was down 73 points at 7558. The Brent is at $113, and as Dr. Balachandran also pointed out, Iraq is the second biggest oil exporter after Saudi Arabia, and India of course is one of the large importers. Deven Choksey now joins us on the line. Deven, just to get a quick sense from you, how are, this is all unexpected for the markets, while the markets themselves may have been looking at a breather, I would imagine. How are you seeing things play out right now?
Hi Govind. Well, I think my sense is that currently the market is getting somewhat nervous more because of two reasons. Not as much as nervousness is coming up because of the Iraq crude oil prices, because the crude oil prices are not going up anyway. On the contrary, I think if you look at the future contracts of crude oil, you might probably find that I think there is some amount of short covering which has led to this particular rise in the Brent crude oil prices. But the fresh long positions are not getting built. On the other side, I think we are seeing the future contracts in the crude probably at $116 and $120. I think we are also finding some amount of short position getting built in. So it gives a very clear indication that the crude oil prices are unlikely to rise. Now the second point which the market is not very sure about, and that's where I think the rupee has slipped, is about the US action on the in the entire matter. The US has remained on the sidelines at this point of time, and they are not intervening in this matter. So probably as a result of which, I think the rupee has slipped I think little more, because some amount of credit funds have started withdrawing part of their positions because of this issue I think in the global market. According to me, I think the market is not nervous, but market wants to see some amount of stability, clarity, I think on this subject. If that comes in, to my mind, I think the market would stabilize, and the underlying current suggests that I think investors wants to buy. On the contrary, I think many of the long only funds which we see in the international market, they are looking at India very positively, and they see 60 as the right price to get into the market. I think 60 rupee to a dollar is the right price to get into the market, because going forward in next 12 to 15 months, if the rupee is appreciated to say 54, 55 levels, which is distinctly possible post I think policy announcement in budgets, to my mind, I think the international investors, particularly long only investors, they would look for the opportunity to buy at lower levels in the market. So overall, the summation is that the market in the near term might remain somewhat jittery because of this activities going around. But otherwise, I think long only investors are looking forward to buy in this kind of a market when the opportunity is available to them.
Right, Deven, Ayaz, Memon here has a question too.
So, Deven, you said the market is not jittery as yet, but if this simmers longer, and how much longer? Is there a time frame that people in your position are looking at for this issue to be resolved, without really affecting the sentiment of the market?
Well, I think that is a good question. I think whether we would probably have a time frame to this particular activity. I'm not totally sure. I think whether what time frame are we talking about? Because if the US intervenes in this matter, then probably these issues can resolve faster than otherwise. And if they don't, then probably this matter could drag and damage could be more. And if the matter drags, then probably uncertainty situation could take some toll on the market sentiments. As of now, it is not. But I think tomorrow, if it is going to drag more, then probably I think it would take that sentiment toll. I think we'll wait for that call to take. As of now, I think the situation remains, as I explained earlier, I think more on a status quo level.
And Deven, if I were to ask you to, of course, as always, it gets a little more complicated because you're also looking at some domestic situations, including inflation and including the fact that prices are rising and which could rise further if oil prices were to go up, and that impact. So does that change the mix, or is it all adding up to the same thing as before?
By and large, same. I don't think that it is changing it anyway. I think domestic situation is a little bit tricky for sure because of the monsoon factor, the inflation factor, and the new government has just resumed and they are likely to announce their policies now in different areas along with the budget coming up in the next month. So because of that, I think the market is slightly remaining on the, I would say, anxiety levels are relatively there in the market, and people are expecting and hopeful that things could probably pan out well. I don't think that, I think beyond that the market is worried about it at this point of time on any of these issues.
And Deven, overall, if you were to keep these factors aside, Sensex at 25,246, Nifty at 7558, would it have normally suggested a market that is extended?
Well, I think if you look at the valuations, valuation 1 year forward and valuations 2 year forward, that is FY15 and FY16. FY15, I think valuations are somewhere around 15.5 times to 16 times, and FY16 valuations are somewhere around 14 times. So from that perspective, the market's not expensive. At the same time, I think there are many stocks which are right now on a growth path. One important point which I notice in this entire market, when I look at different stocks, many of the companies in last 4 or 5 years have actually built in good amount of capacities. They haven't been able to utilize those capacities because of the market conditions were not conducive. Now that the market condition is turning conducive, I think these companies could possibly generate higher amount of top line and subsequently bottom line. So I think second half of the financial year 14-15 could be the first trigger in which we might see the performance jumping up for the corporate sector, and some of the valuation numbers I think which would get revised on upwards thereafter.
Right, Deven. So external conditions are tricky, but nothing to worry about immediately from an Indian markets point of view. We've got domestic conditions to grapple with as well, including a potential failed monsoon plus the threat of inflation and prices going up, but all of which is reasonably counterbalanced at this point of time, as I understand, because you've got some good companies with good growth potential. Thank you so much for joining us, Deven, as we run out of time. Ayaz, last word on what Iraq means for us, or what we should be looking out for?
Well, certainly it means a lot for us in terms of oil prices and therefore domestic prices, but I would go with the sentiment expressed by Deven that, if there's timely intervention and this kind of turmoil is arrested ASAP, then, the crisis blows over, so to speak. But it is a looming crisis, let's not ignore it.
We're going to be back very soon. Thanks for watching.